Welcome back to part 3 of this Django chat application. Today we're going to make it possible to add rooms and similar. So we're going to create rooms, show list of rooms, and then create consumers for joining a chat. So the first thing we can do is to create a new app for the rooms. So if you go to the command line and stop the web server, we can create a new app by saying python manage.py start app room. Great, and just like we added core to the list of installed apps, we need now to add room to the list as well. So you can go back to the editor and find settings.py. In here we have the installed apps, and then at the bottom of the list we can add room. Next step is to create a database model. A database model is where we describe to Django what information we want to store in the database. So if I find the room app here, and then the file called models.py. Then we can create a new model for the room by saying class room, and then we pass in models.model. And I want one field for the name and one for the slug. So the name is a normal char field with a max length of 255, and then the slug field is a much better word for using in the URL than the name. And this is also had to be unique, so we get error if you try to create two similar rooms. So now that we have the database model for the rooms, we need to update the database. So we need to go back to the command line again and say python manage.py make migrations to create the migrations scripts. Sorry, I forgot to save the file. So try it again. And now we see here that we want to create a new model called room. And then to run the migration script, we need to run python manage.py migrate. So now the script that was created here was executed. So now the database should be updated and we should have a table for the rooms in the database. So then I can go to the to-do list and set the first task to done. Next step then is to create a super user so you can log into the admin interface and create rooms. So one more time we need to go back to the command line and say python manage.py create super user and hit enter. So then you can just create with whatever username you want. Great, so now the super user was created successfully. Next we can run the server again by running python manage.py run server. Now I have it running here in the browser. I want to open up one more browser so I can log into the admin interface without interrupting the user that I have here. So if I open up Firefox and then go to this address /admin. Then I can log in with the admin user I just created. And here we have possibility to create users and groups. But we don't need to do that right now. Then I want to make it possible to show the rooms here. So we can create rooms for the chat application. So if I go back to the studio code and then into admin.py, we need to register the model here. First we import it by saying from.models import room. And then just admin.site.register, then we pass in the model there and save. So if I go back now and refresh, you'll see that the rooms appeared here. Perfect. So let's go ahead and create a few rooms. Let's say work, and then the slug, and then one more for hobby, and save. So now we have 2 rooms for our chat application. Great. So then I can go to the to-do list again and set this to done. And then I want to make it possible to show a list of rooms here in the application when I go to /rooms. So the first thing I want to do then is to create a view for getting the rooms from the database. So here inside the views.py, I can begin by importing the database model from .models import room. And then I also want to make sure that the user is authenticated to access this. And to do that we need to use a decorator called @login required. And then we need to import this as well from Django. So here above this import we say from django.contrib.auth.decorators import login required. So if you try to go to this page without being authenticated, you will be redirected to the login page. Now we can create the view by saying def rooms. Then we pass in the request. And then we can get all of the rooms from the database by saying rooms equals room.objects.all. And then we need to render the view by saying return render. So we use the function which is imported up here. We can pass in the request, and then we need to specify the template, which is room/rooms.html. Now we need to also pass in the rooms, so these are available in the front end. And save. So that's the view for now. Next, I want to create the template for listing the different rooms. So I can begin by creating a new folder here called templates, and then in there a new folder called room. And then we can create this template which is called rooms.html, like that. So here I can make a copy of one of the other templates because I want to extend the base template and similar. So if I just copy all of this in the front page.html, like that, now we can rename the title to rooms and also the title here to rooms. So then we have everything we need there to test this. I just want to create a new urls.py file for the rooms, so we keep things as clean as possible. So urls.py. And here I want to import path from Django, from django.urls import path, which is a function. And then from dot import views, so I just import all of the views from this file. And then we need to set up the URL patterns. So when we go to just this empty path, we need to use the views.rooms view and specify the name to be rooms. So I have it empty here because I want to specify rooms as the prefix in the main URLs file. So if I scroll up and find the URLs py file here, I can say path rooms slash. So all the URLs that begins with rooms will be redirected in here. That's why this can be empty. So then we can say include room.urls, which is the file we just created, and save. So now I think I can go back to the browser, refresh, and now we'll see that the title is up here and also the title for the page we are on. Great. So then we just need to loop through the rooms here and show a link so we can join them later. So if we go back to the template and then below this div, I want to create a new div for listing the rooms. So this should fill out the whole screen. I want it to be flex, and if the rooms fills out the screen, they should wrap to the new line. And I set items centered so they are next to each other and on the same height. And then in here we can say for room in rooms. So then we loop through the variable we got and for. And then one more div for the actual room. So for mobile, I want this to fill out the whole screen, but if we are on desktop, it should only fill out 1/4 of the screen. Then add some padding on the sides and padding on the tops, or over and below the content. And then in here, I want one more div so we can have it white and some shadow. So I specify that there is padding all over this box, the background to be white, and there's a shadow around it, and the corners should be rounded, and the text for the box should be centered on the screen or inside the box. And then we have the title for the room, which is set the margin bottom 5, so we get some spacings below this title down to the join button. It should be 2XL font size and it's semi-bold. Now we can use this variable to show the title, so room.name. And then below here I want a button for joining the chat. So I set the href to be empty for now, and then I create the button and add some spacings to it. I set it to be blocked so the margin will work as expected. I add a rounded corner, set the text to be white, and then the button to be BG 600, and when you hover it, it goes a little bit darker. So now I can save this, go back to the browser and refresh. And now we can see the workroom and the hobby and the button for joining them. Perfect. So then I can go back to the to-do list, set this task to done, and then I need to create a new room detail view so we can click the join button and go into it. So I can go back to the views.py and I can copy this decorator, and then below here I say def room, we pass in the request parameter, and here we also need the slug for finding the room in the database. And then we can get the room from the database by saying room equals room.objects.get, where slug equals slug. And we will pass this in from the URL spy in a second. And then I can also make a copy of this so I don't have to write all of it. So we want to specify the room template, and we need to pass in the room instead of the rooms, and save. Great. So then I can continue by creating the template. So I can just copy this template again, create a new file, and save it as room.html. And I can remove this one because we don't need the list of rooms. And here I want to show the name of the room we are on, so room.name. And the same thing with the page title here. So now we can save this and continue by importing it here to the paths. So I say path, and then we want to expect here a slug called slug. So this is the type of parameter, and this is the name, which is also the same as here. Then we need to add a slash at the end there and say views.room, and the name of this should also be room. And save. So then I want to make it possible to click this join button so we can go into that. So we can use a parameter or directive from Django called URL, and then we specify room, which points to this name here. And then we can just specify the slug by saying room.slug and save. So if I now go back to the browser and refresh, these buttons should be able to be clicked. So click it, and then you see work here and work up in the browser. Great. So now I want to build the HTML for the chat. It's just hard coded for now, but I will see what everything will look like when it's finished. So go back here and find the room.html. Below here I want to create a wrapper for the messages, and then below there a wrapper for the form. So I can begin with the view with the messages. And this, when you're on desktop, should fill out half of the screen, and set the MX4 so we get some margins on the sides for the mobile version. And when you're on desktop, I want it to be centered on the screen. I also set some paddings above and below the content and also on the sides. The background should be white and have rounded corners. And then in here, I create a new div with the class text message, chat messages. And I set space y3 so we get spacings between the chat messages inside here. I also set ID chat messages so we can reference this here from the JavaScript later. And then I have some code for each of the messages, which will look like this. It's a div with paddings all around inside of the content, the BG grade 200, and also rounded corners. And I have a paragraph for the username, which is set to semi-bold, so it's a little bit separated from the content. So we can try to add a few of these. Save. So if I now go back and refresh, you'll see this white div we created, and then a few messages inside there. Next step then is to add a form below here for submitting the messages. So here we have the same type of div as we have up here, which is a white one with rounded corners and similar. And then in here we add the form by saying form method post. Action should go to the same page we are on, and then class flex so we can have the input button next to the input field. Don't need these, I think, because we're going to use JavaScript for submitting it, but I like to add it anyway. So then in here we want one input field for the content. So this is input type text, then the name is set to content, and then class flex1 so it fills out most of this form with the margin right 3 so it has some spacings on the right side next to the button. set a placeholder to your message, so we know that this is where you write your message, and then the ID, so we can also reference this from the JavaScript. And then we also have a button with the class px5 and py3, so we get some spacings inside it. Set the rounded corners, text white, and then typical green background and hover effect. We also need the ID here, so we can use this or reference it from the JavaScript. Now we can save this, refresh, we can see what it looks like. So here you have the input field and then the submit button. Great. So then we can go to the to-do list again, set this task to done. And then we're going to proceed to the next task, which is creating a consumer. A consumer helps us using WebSockets, so we can handle connections, disconnection, receiving and sending messages, and similar. So it's a typical Python script. And the first thing we can do then is to go to settings of Py, because we need to set up the channel layers here. So we can go below here and set channel layers equals, and then object, set the default layer, also a dictionary, and then the backend we are going to use. I'm just going to use an in-memory channel layer for this tutorial. So channels.layers.in-memory channel layer. You can use Redis and similar, which you have to use if you're going to use this in production. So for now, all of the messages that are sent will just be stored in the memory of the server. So if you shut it off, they will be lost forever. Great. So then inside the room folder, we can create one more file called consumers.py. And then we need to import a few things. We can begin by importing JSON, because we're going to use that later. So import JSON. And then we're going to import the class we're going to use for creating a consumer. And I want to import sync to async, which we're also going to use later. This is for storing things in the database inside the asynchronous view. So then we can create a consumer by saying class chat consumer. Now we can pass in the async WebSocket consumer. And the first thing we want to handle here is the connection. So we can create an asynchronous view by saying async def connect. So each time you try to connect to this, you will go into this function. And then based on the URL we are trying to connect to, we want to get the room name from there. I'm going to show you this in the JavaScript later. And we also need to set up something called a group name. This is just chat or prefix this with the room name. And then we can use this to join it by saying await self.channel layer .group add, and then we pass in self.room name and self.group name. So now we can join this. So when this is done, we want to proceed to the next task, which is self.accept. And then we are authenticated and connected to the server. And we also need a disconnect function. So async def disconnect, pass in self, so we are using the class. And then to leave, we just say await self.channel layer .group discard, and then we just pass in these two here. Sorry, this was supposed to be self.group name, and then down below here self.channel name. We haven't specified this here because channels fixes this automatically for us. So I can copy these two and paste it down here. So now we have the possibility to connect and disconnect to the chat server. And just like we have a file called urls.py for our different pages, we want a similar file for the WebSockets. So inside the room app, we need to create one more file called routing.py. And then we can use the path function here as well. So from Django.urls import path. And then we need to import the consumer we created. So from .import consumers. Now we can set up the patterns, which here will be called WebSocket URL patterns equals, and then a list. And then we say path WS, which stands for WebSocket, slash string or slug, but we use string here, room name, like that. And then we need to specify consumers.chatConsumer as ASGI and save. So now this file should be finished. And we already have a file called ASGI in the main application here, but we need to change this a little bit. So we can remove this comment, and then we need to import a few things from channels. So below this Django import here, I want to import auth middleware stack, so we can use authentication here. And also from the router, we want to import protocol type router and URL router. And we need to import the routing file we just created, this one. So import room.routing. And then this can just be like it is, so Django is set up in this file. And this can be replaced with protocol type router, which comes from channels. And then HTTP get ASGI application. And also the WebSocket needs to be specified here, WebSocket. And here we want to add the auth middleware stack. And in here we create a new instance of this URL router. And in there is a room.routing.websocket URL patterns, which points to this function here. Great. So now everything in the backend should be finished. Don't have any errors here. So then we can go to the to-do list and set the task to done. And then we want to make it possible to join the chat using WebSockets. The first thing we need to do then is to open up the base.html file. And then below the content, we want to create one more block for adding JavaScript. So block scripts and save. And we can go and find the room.html file and create a block here as well. So block scripts. Then we use the end block function. And then here we add the script tag. And then const chat socket equals new web socket. This is built into all browsers. Now we need to specify the address for connection. So ws:/ plus window.location.host. This is the URL. Plus /ws, which is the prefix we added in the routing file. Plus the room name. And then one more plus to add a slash at the end. I will get this very soon. So now we have a new chat socket connection, then we want to use it by saying chat socket.onMessage equals function, pass in the event, and then here we can say console.log onMessage, just so we know that this function was triggered. And also close, or we want to also listen to onClose if the server stops or similar. So chat socket.onClose. We can copy this and just say onClose in the log instead. And then we want to get the room name, which is also the one which is used up here. To do that as best as possible, we need to add it here. Room.slug, because we want to slug. Pass it into JSON script, which is a filter we get from Django. JSON room name. And then we want to get this from down here by saying const room name equals json.parse. So we get this element and parse the content. Document.getElementById. And the ID is JSON room name. And say .text content, because we want the content of this script tag. So if we now save go back to the browser, just open up the inspector, refresh. Then I got an error here. So if I go to the command line, you can see here that the chat consumer has no attribute called accept. That's because it's a typo. So if I go back to the consumers.py, try to find this typo. Here we want to say self.accept instead. So now everything is restarted, and when I refresh, nothing stands there. And if I go to the command line, you will see here that the WebSocket is handshaking. That means that it's checking that everything is okay. And then after it says WebSocket connect. So now this is connected to the backend using WebSockets. And that was it for this part. In the next part, we're going to make it possible to send messages and also store them in the database and similar.